everyone wants a flagrant one, a flagrant two. Now, what are you supposed to do with a shot blocker? Now, right there, you're going to say, well, he didn't go for the shot. Well, guess what? This is a bona fide primetime shot blocker. Now, give Daniels a lot of credit because he took it right in there. And then as the foul line, he's definitely hit in the action, but they're calling that the foul happened before that he left his feet and attacked the rim.
What was no more than a regular foul, a non-shooting foul, would have been a flagrant foul in today's league.
So it's an on-the-floor call. Antonio Daniels, big. Malik Rose drives past Nowitzki, and his floater drops. Can't flop. 12 seconds in the period, 11-point Spurs lead. Now, you can't flop in a situation like that.
Don't hear too much criticism on the flops from the announcers nowadays, nor did I think that was a blatant flop either.
There's the personal foul.
That's a flop.
That's the acting that Stevenson was talking about. Chalmers hits the technical free throw, and now James will go to the line.
Listen, as a coach, to me, you have every right to voice your displeasure. Those type of plays, to me, are starting to make parts of our game a farce. It's happening more and more. Where is the cutoff?
The slightest contact, the guys going down and flailing their arms.
That's
But Bug, it would be what you wanted to do. Not at?
No, I want him to pay a price for it. I want there to be a severe penalty so that every time I go back on the film as the dean of discipline and I watch every game and every possession, those flagrant acts of acting, I am hammering.
You can't give yourself a title.
I can give myself, the commissioner says I can come to work for him anytime.
He really did say that. Correa, foul by.
When analyzing all-time greats and distinguishing who is better between them, it's important to not just look at the numbers, but use your eyes. Understand what's going on in the time that they are playing. What would have been a foul in today's league was trying hard in the yesteryear. And as good of a driver LeBron James is, things like this have to be understood when analyzing him.
Wow. That was really not a foul on the play. The ball basically missed the layup. Well, that's right. There's no foul. And Paul can't believe it. And
CP is one of my favorites, actually my second favorite all time. But that was not a foul. And that's how I analyze basketball and how it should be played. I could sit here all day and give more examples, but this is already understood. In the 80s and 90s, did players act or flop? Yes. In the 80s and 90s, did people get away with calls? Yes. It's the clip in which things happen. The referee is human, and you will have imperfect calls. So, of course, things like that are going to mix in between. But how often things happen is where you really get in the nooks and crannies of things. Now, of course, you may see one player flop in the 90 game, but see 4 to 6 flops in a single quarter in today's league. Yes, the Joker hit Marcus or Markieff Morris. By the end of the day, fights happened all the time in the 90s. When watching 80s games, after a couple games you realized that the players, when they drove to the basket, they weren't as effective, and it was for the simple fact they were getting hit. And when you watch a couple games and you see the players get hit a certain way and you see different players react a certain way and deter from going to the hoop, it can really affect the player's performance. Big game, James Worthy, an all-time driver at the basket in the 86 or 87 finals, was accused of not really driving to the basket because of his punishment that he took in the previous games. In the finals, he wasn't driving to the basket because of how much he was getting hit. It was common to see players miss layups they should have made for the simple fact the next play, if they attempted that same layup, the center would have clipped them in the elbow or would have hit them in the ribs or would have bumped them in the chest. As someone that started the rule change series, you guys know how I feel about the rule changes and how that matters. Many times I saw a guard like Michael or Magic dribble the ball and they got called for traveling. But they got called for traveling on something no one would have gotten called for traveling in today's league. They would call you for putting your hand under the ball. But this is common work in today's league. The rules for carrying was different. The hand checking was different. Of course, if a player like James Harden was hand checked, he wouldn't be able to face up and dribble as much. The reason you see a lot of the older guards do a lot of posting up is to basically combat the hand check. When you're trying to do all the dribble moves and someone can just put their hand right on your hip, it can cause problems. But now I'd like to talk about how I look at the game in general, besides the eras. Though players weren't encouraged to shoot as much as they do now, I'm not going to make a player shoot or pretend they shot more than they did. And as far as points are concerned, a player who has 30 points and another player who has 28 points per se. But the difference here is the 30 points were from free throws and the 28 points were, conventional 28 points. I'm going to like the 28 points more. I'm not going to necessarily reward you for shooting a bunch of free throws. And at the same time, free throws, though I don't really care, if you make free throws when the game's on the line.
Before ending in controversial fashion last night in San Antonio. This, of course, the final play. Brent Barry, who was magnificent last night. The contact with Fisher, no call was made, and the Lakers.
Say player A scores 30 points between the first two quarters and ends the game with 35 points. Now, player B has 29 points, but all his points were evened out. He might have even scored more points in the fourth quarter. I'm going to give it to player B. Say you balled out for 2 quarters, but in the fourth quarter, game on the line, you were a brick fest, or you weren't even shooting the ball, hiding from the ball, in fact. Now, the other guy was opposite, trash in the beginning of the game, but stood up at the end of the game. I'm going to look at you guys, depending on how things really played out, somewhere even. A game winner to tie is a different game winner than leading. A game winner to protect is different from a game winner to bring yourself back in. And these are all marginal. But the last example of game winners would be, say a player had a game winner and it was tie game. And they would have went into overtime. And the other scenario is it was a game winner, but they're down by 1 and they need a basket. One's a little bit better than the other. I say that to say, I picked 40 players out of the NBA's history, and I watched around 30 to an hour of their highlights and 7 games each to decide who is the greatest player amongst the eye test. If you're not familiar with the eye test, it's how you judge the players based off just watching them. It's kind of like the opposite of Self-Reacher's Facts. Though he has a great channel, I am subscribed. One thing is clear. Sometimes the numbers don't tell the full story. Sometimes you can look at the data and all this other stuff, but sometimes a player is just faster than another player. A shooter is better than another shooter. and different eras promote different things. I decided to pick these 40 players based off their legacy and what they accomplished in their basketball careers, as well as how good they look when watching them. And these players were the players I thought were safest to go and look at. I know I might have missed a player or two, and I also left out players from the 70s other than Kareem. But that's for the simple fact there's more to learn about that era, and there's a lot of things you can't really change. The dribbling was a lot more strict. There wasn't the shooting. The shooting just came in 79. So it's hard to say someone can shoot as good as another player can when there's no facts to base that off of. It's obvious players like Wilt Chamberlain weren't even allowed to play like a Shaquille O'Neal. And so, though he is, in my opinion, the most dominant of all time and the most athletic and strongest of all time, it's hard to think about how he would push people around if he just didn't push people around. Wilt specifically wasn't included for the games, the lack of games, but I'll throw him in here in the next series. The range of 40 players is pretty vast in what they basically bring to the table. You have Tim Duncan, who has 5 championships. I don't think he ever led the league in any statistical category, but is known as the all-time power forward, has to be looked at. And then you have players like Kyrie Irving, who a lot of people say is some of the greatest players they've ever seen, has the best skill set they've ever seen. They place in top 5, So things like that, he has to be in there. Other players, KD, another player has a lot of shine in this category, because I'm not looking at what he did as far as what he won, but just how good he looks when he's playing. I decided to look at players based off important games, I thought, both in the regular season and in the playoffs. Regular season games that are important are like Christmas games, or games to push you into the playoffs, or games going against a fellow contemporary, say KD versus LeBron James. That's a game KD shouldn't want to lose and should go basically his best to prove to LeBron that he's better. The same way when the Celtics play the Mavericks is going to be important is the same way I look at those regular season games. And the playoff games, I looked at Game 1s as probably my favorite games to watch based off the pure competition of it. The teams are all tied. There's only one goal, that's to win the series. There's no necessarily falling apart or basically believing your team can't do it or being overconfident. It's just go out there and win. Of course, all elimination games, Game 7s and Game 6s, are also extremely important. I look at the player who is going to win or has a chance to take the lead. I give them a special view, and the person who is trying to fight from losing, I give them a special view. Things like that are all considered. This something here is not something that we're all going to agree upon. Obviously, there's going to be some things we disagree upon on as far as, the ethics of the game. I believe if a player is going to get an easy basket, I believe it's in your right to foul him and make him earn the free throws. I don't believe you should hurt them per se. I don't think any hurting is necessary. I really didn't like a lot of the 80s games for the simple fact you can really tell that players were just scared a lot of the times, and even when they weren't scared, when you drive to the rim and you know you might get hit, that's going to be in your brain somewhere. Somewhere there that may cause you to miss layups. And I saw great players miss layups I thought they should have made. And so I felt like the 70s and past was a little hard to basically grade. So I gave them a break, and I'll include them into the next draft. Before I go into the grading system and my preferences, last thing I would like to talk about is advantages and disadvantages. Basically what I've been talking about so far. Nikola Jokic is going to dominate players right now, especially the centers where power forwards are playing centers. So he's going to dominate, and I'm not going to necessarily knock him or anything like that, but his grading is going to be more on a hill versus another center who's going against a harder competition. And the same thing is done as far as guards, and they're offensive and defensive ability. So James Harden is going to have a cut down, I guess, or some type of asterisk on his offense. But a Kawhi Leonard is going to have an upgrade on his defense because it's harder to play in today's league. And so things like that you have to basically incorporate and think about in this fantasy scenario. The players will be having modern technology as far as getting better and modern knowledge as far as where the game has progressed, but it will also be in a more physical and what I like to think about how basketball should be played. For me, when basketball is played, I like to think about it as kind of how you play like outside in the park. Obviously, there's going to be referees to call the double dribbles, the pickups, the traveling. But just as far as park is concerned, I'm talking about the way you play. Like, just because you might have hit somebody slightly, it's not necessarily a foul. Did you actually affect their shot? Did you foul them? Things like that are going to be kind of thrown into there. In this league of mine, there will be no any second back to basket, no 3 in the key or the 5-second defensive rule. There will be no drawing technical fouls as far as making sure someone hits you in a way that the rules are a foul. But obviously you drive to the rim and you know you could get fouled like that. Obviously that's something else. And both offensive and defensive zones are fully allowed in this league, as well as hand checking. Now, if you guys are fully interested in what the rules of this league would be, let me know down below, and I'll definitely get a video on that out. But I might talk about a different thing now. Personal preferences. Now, for me, I'm a guy who favors the big man position. I think the center position is the most valuable position in the NBA. So when you look at what each position brings as far as its value, it'll set kind of a hard cap on a player to some degree. Look out for the future video where I explain more in depth why I think the center position is the best position. But the center position controls the defensive end as far as controlling the paint. A lot of layups and dunks are deterred from the center. The center controls who goes in the paint and what times. As far as offense is concerned, they're the one, especially 7-footers in general, just playing basketball. When you've played against a player who is just really good in the paint and you just have to give the ball to them and it's an automatic 2 points or a point, it's a little bit different. A mid-range shot, though is doable and though can be easy, will never be as easy as a layup, will never be as easy as a dunk. And the center position are going to get the most layups and the most dunks when given the ball. As far as what they do on the rebounding is another big thing. When players and teams miss shots, the center has the role to either grab the rebound and give the team another possession, or to end the other team's possession and start a new possession of their own. And that's why the center position, to me, is the most important position. Even when you don't block the shots, some players are going to be a little bit more nervous when their shots or they've seen their other players' shots been blocked. When you have a reputation of blocking shots, they're not going to want to get packed. So driving to the rim is going to be different. We've seen how people are scared of Wembanyama driving to the rim, and we've seen people miss layups when LeBron James is behind them. And that's just a small example of how much weight the center position holds. The NBA in the game of basketball has always tried to somehow lessen the center's effect, when it be goaltending or 3 seconds to the basket or 3 in the key. They try to stop the center and try to allow other players who are a little bit smaller to have a better game. And so I do look at the centers with more respect than the other positions. Secondly, following right after that is obviously the point guard. The point guard distributes the ball, carries the ball in their hands, and gets the ball where it needs to be. And if you don't have a point guard who can do that, you're going to lose. Now I would like to talk about my grading system. So As I said before, things that may happen in different eras are going to be looked at a little differently, and the position you play and what you bring to your team is going to be looked at a little different. I graded players out of a score of a 100. 100 meaning I have no acts of you to do in that game. You basically had a perfect game. And you started off at a 75. Shortly after watching this player you see on the screen here, I implemented the 101 score. That's when I watched your game, in my opinion, I thought to myself, am I watching the GOAT? Or when I actually implemented the score, I wanted to take it off because I knew I was watching the GOAT. There are no players that have a 100 score that deserved a 101 score. The players that have the 101 score really showed me something and really made me think. I looked at 7 games of each player. And then after that, I implemented their highlights. So I took their 7 games, then I used 3 scores of their highlights to make it a total of 10. Then I found the mean, the median, and the mode. The mean, for those who aren't too sure and aren't too familiar with the math, the mean is the average. How much points did he average a game? But something that also really mattered to me and something that kind of skewed a lot of the results, so I had to throw them in there, were the median and the mode. The mode, not as much. The mode, a lot of the times, were results of highlights. But the median. The median now is looking at the middle result. So not looking at your worst, not looking at your best, but looking at the middle result. And again, not the average, but the middle result. So I haven't really looked at this because it's not necessarily a popular way of scoring things. But picture Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain scored 50 many, many times. So though the seasons he may have averaged 18 bumps down his points per game, his median, I would assume, would be probably higher than mine. And so the mean does matter more than the median, and the median does matter than the mode. So I gave them their own multipliers, and I ranked them based off that. I decided to do rankings and the numbers just for now, for the simple fact I'd like to get more games under my belt and make the final draft where I do give you my raw opinion on who is just the best based off what I saw. But I had to use numbers in the beginning for the simple fact there's things I haven't seen and there's some biasness in there. And I'd like to think after watching a couple more games, I would have all the arguments basically settled. Again, I'd like to talk about why the median mattered. The median mattered, in my opinion, because, of course, a player may have a bad game, and a player may have a really good game, and that may skew the average. But somewhere in the middle of their score really does show you how good that player was. And so that's why I really did have to implement this. Now, the median doesn't show their bad performances, and so I won't neglect their bad performances, not at all. But that is why these things are also brought into here. And so when I do the draft, I will talk about their mean mostly, but the draft will be comprised of those 3 things and those 3 results. I would like to thank you for the patience and the time. I know the draft has been a long time in coming, and that's why I kind of had to rush this. I had to leave my mic, couldn't necessarily find it, but had to put this out there because the draft results are in. And I have some subscribers who have personally let me know they're really looking forward to this, and they can't wait for it to be out. And so I've had you waiting long enough. The draft will be out soon. Hope you guys like the results. Hope you guys understand the draft. And again, if this needs to be remade, this explanation here, it will be done. Till next time, until the draft, salam.
First pick in the 2003 NBA.
Whatever, I don't know, whatever's after the millennials. when they're controlling the conversation, I think it's like LeBron's going to be called the GOAT.
LeBron excuse rebuttal. What you do is you're explaining away to me why Kevin Durant.
Absence of a father at home tends to lead to guys being more sensitive. You think about it.
You scared of MJ?
Yeah.
Actually beat you. What was that experience like playing, a lot of people say is the greatest player of all time?
Then what you see happens here.
Subscribe to Juba Jordan.